My name's Kip Adams. We just heard who I work for, what I do, and I'll say that I'm a proud member of the Fire Council Board here. So I am really happy for what we have been able to do relative to this. It's nice to be back in person after being virtual, but I hope you're enjoying it as well. And we'll end today, before the social, talking a little bit more about deer habitat, and then fire specifically, how we can use that to enhance deer habitat. But let's set the stage first, just relative to deer and like what this really means, not only to Pennsylvania, but to anywhere in the United States that the whitetails call home. I know we have over 200 people here today, but we have over 50 people on Zoom, many of which are from other states. So they don't realize how fortunate we are to be in the Commonwealth here, or the deer resources that we have. So very briefly, we know that from a hunting perspective, deer hunting is America's pastime. We know that deer are among the most widespread wildlife species, in that they're the most sought after game animal. Anything else we want to hunt, and there's a lot of other things that we can hunt, either with a bow or a gun or a camera, deer are at the top of this list. And across the United States, we know that nearly 8 out of 10 hunters identifies themselves as a deer hunter. Specifically, it's 79%. And if we look at numbers with that, across the US, there's somewhere around 11 million deer hunters. Sometimes it feels like just about all of them are here in Pennsylvania, right? Especially on opening day of firearms season. Well, turkey hunters are the second largest segment of the hunting community, and there's about 3 million turkey hunters, somewhere around 1.5 million duck hunters, and less than 1 million elk hunters. Now, I love to chase turkeys and ducks and elk around as well, but I just show this just to show the sheer number, the sheer magnitude of difference of deer hunters across the United States as compared to everything else. So because of that, that means we have, if we are managing deer habitat, we have a tremendous opportunity to manage for healthy deer herds through good deer habitat and have a hugely beneficial impact on a whole bunch of other wildlife species. If we take a look at this quickly from the economic side, because of the sheer number of hunters, we know that deer drive the hunting industry. Deer hunters annually spend more than $23 billion on this pursuit, with a total multiplier effect of over 50 billion. So that is a tremendous amount of money being pumped into our wildlife management programs that benefit all of those other wildlife species in those states where deer call home and deer hunters reign supreme. So with that, then, it is important to us to do a good job managing deer, and it all starts with habitat. The best job that we can do to have healthy deer herds certainly incorporates the deer season end of it from a harvest standpoint as well. But it really comes down to, hey, let's have good habitat for deer. And the cool thing is if we do a good job with deer habitat, we're also providing good habitat for a whole host of other wildlife species. With respect to what we're doing today, we know that this is important for both does and fawns, as well as bucks. And from a habitat end, we need to have good habitat for deer in all age classes. This fawn has different nutritional requirements than its mother. They have different nutritional requirements than that buck. And those requirements can change as you go through the year. So we can get really, really technical, and I can explain exactly what they need for the different times. We're not going to do that, partly because I'm not that smart. I think to think in simple terms and just know from a manager standpoint that if we do a good job with what I'm going to follow with after this, we can cover all of those nutritional requirements for both sexes, for all the age classes, and for every season of the year, regardless if you're in Florida, Maine, or somewhere in between. So let's start with this, though. If we're going to manage habitat and provide good habitat, we have to make sure we have enough food. And a lot of hunters and even a lot of land managers don't realize the amount of high quality food each deer eats annually. And on average, it's about a ton. You know, we think of each of these little bites they're taking, but each deer eats about a ton of food a year. And this isn't just a ton of junk food. This is a ton of high quality food. Smaller deer eat less than this, bigger deer eat more than that, but on average, it's about a ton apiece. That's a lot of food that we need to provide. So if we take a look at this picture right here, kind of this cool little group of deer in this food plot, that means that whoever's managing this area just for this group of deer needs to be providing around 16,000 pounds of high quality forage during the course of the year. Now that's certainly a whole lot more food than this little quarter-acre food plot's going to provide, right? It is. So I think the best way for us to be able to provide everything deer need is to first understand the sheer amount of food that is necessary. And this often, and we want to tackle this from two ways. Yeah, we want to balance the deer herd with what's available. So it's important to harvest the appropriate number of antlerless deer each year. But at the same time, let's be doing as good a job we can from the land side and enhance that habitat as much as possible so that we can carry more deer if we want. But at the same time, make sure all of those deer are at the top of their nutritional plane. Think about it. This side of the room here, I fed you all the rice cakes you wanted to eat. you would survive. You probably wouldn't be as heavy as you are right now. You certainly wouldn't be as healthy as you are. In this side over here, we gave you a really good balanced diet of steak and potatoes and vegetables and fish and all this. So this isn't about just providing enough green stuff out there for deer to survive. It's about, hey, let's be good at what we do and provide really good stuff. Let them express their body growth potential. Let them express their antler potential, and let those does express their fawn recruitment potential. All right. So with that then, habitat management. And I'm going to break this into 3 different components because they're very different and how we attack them is very different. Everything from a deer habitat standpoint, I think of it from a forested area. So we're going to manage forest, an old field or early successional vegetation area, and then from a food plot end. So with that, if that's what we want to do, fortunately, and perfectly in tune for what we're talking about today, is we can use fire in all 3 of these. And we routinely do on my place in northern Pennsylvania. I'm a Pennsylvania native. I'm so blessed to live in Pennsylvania. For NDA, I travel the country. I work in 20 to 25 different states each year. So I get to see a lot of cool things, work with a lot of good people, but I am always glad to come home. Almost every picture that I show you here today, particularly the ones of the fire, are all from Pennsylvania. So certainly I get to use fire in other states as well. And Luke showed some great stuff from the South, pictures of fires and all that, but this stuff is all from right here. So anybody sitting in this room can be doing this right here within Pennsylvania. So if we're going to do that, then what's the first thing we need? We need a drip torch, right? And 2 drip torches is better than 1 drip torch. Actually, that's not true. This is often the fun part of it, but that's not the first thing we need. The first thing that we need is a goal. How are we going to use this to meet what we're trying to do? And I'm going to set this up from a deer end as our goal should be to provide year-round nutrition for deer. We often think of this from the hunting season, having an attraction standpoint, or maybe during the growing season, because we want to make sure those bucks get as big as they possibly can from an antler standpoint. But not as many people realize that deer actually survive a year very similar to the way bears do. They obviously don't hibernate in the winter, but they survive by getting as heavy as they possibly can in the summer and fall. Then they live off that tissue fat during the winter. And year-round nutrition is extremely important in the spring. Does are getting ready to have fawns. Bucks are starting to grow antlers. And we always think about this from the antler end. And Luke did a nice job explaining about the nutritional requirements between these. Yeah, it's expensive to grow antlers, but it's nowhere near as expensive as it is for a fawn or a doe to raise fawns. And in the spring, the doe is getting ready. She's entering the last trimester of gestation, getting ready to have that fawn. And one thing that's cool about deer is even though they breed in the fall, and then they go into the most limiting time of the season, fortunately, almost all fetal growth and all the energy she puts into that pregnancy occurs in the 3rd trimester. So when the 3rd trimester starts, right about green up. Pretty cool how it works that way, isn't it? That's why it's so important that those deer breed at that time in the fall, early to mid-November for us. So almost all of that energy is going into that at about during the springtime. So we want to make sure we have some good habitat out there for them such that she can adequately provide nutrition for that growing fetus. We get into the summer. Now bucks are growing antlers. Yeah, we want to get them what they can. But from an energetic standpoint, it is more expensive to raise a fawn than anything else that deer do. Way more expensive than trying to grow antlers, grow body growth, etc. So this is when we absolutely have to be providing lots of nutrition and high quality nutrition. This is when our habitat needs to be absolutely rocking. And I'll ask you this from a fawn standpoint or a milk production standpoint. If you take a doe that's on a really high nutritional plane and take another doe that's nutritionally deprived, is this one who's getting better food, is her milk higher in quality? The answer is no. Milk quality is identical between the two. What's the difference? The volume. That deer on a high nutritional plane can provide a whole bunch more milk for her fawn or fawns, which then allows them to grow much faster, which means they can avoid predators better. So from a fawn recruitment standpoint, they do a far better job surviving into, in the hunting season and being recruited into the adult population. So we need to make sure during the summertime that we are really giving them everything that they need. We get to the fall, bucks are now shedding that velvet, so their antlers aren't growing anymore, but this is when they need to pack on as many pounds as possible because they get to the rut. What happens? They chase does all over. They may go a month without eating or hardly eating anything. It's very common for bucks to lose 20 to 25% of their body weight during the rut. Then what follows the rut? Winter. They don't have time to add it back. So we want to make sure before they hit that rut that they have that big old thick layer of fat on their back that they then get to use during the year or during the winter. From a fawn standpoint, they end up growing longer into the fall than adults do. You know, deer don't have the ability to choose whether they want to add fat or not. Photoperiod drives that for them. Certain time of the year, their body just starts laying on a layer of fat to get ready for winter. Fawns get to grow a little longer, so it's important that we have as good a food as we can to give them that ability to grow as much as possible and still add fat before we get into winter. If you're in Mississippi, where Luke is now, not as big of a deal. Up here, it becomes a big deal of whether or not they can add on a good layer of fat. Then in the winter, then the game really comes to, let's just slow the use of those fat reserves. Deer are going to lose weight over winter, even captive deer. Feeders can stay full. They're going to lose weight. It's because it's how deer evolved. So they get as heavy as they can, live off that tissue fat. Research we did when I was at the University of New Hampshire showed that adult deer get about 50% of their daily nutrition from tissue fat. They're going to use that. So they get as fat as they can in the fall, come out in the spring pretty lean. But with good habitat management, we can make sure that we are providing some winter food for them, mostly in the form of browse. So even though that's low quality, one of the benefits of it is at least they have easy access to fill their gut. They're digesting that. They're not getting a lot of nutrients out of it, but one of the byproducts of digestion is heat. So as they're doing that, that heat is given off. It allows them to maintain body temperature easier. They don't have to use as much of that fat layer, which then extends the time into the spring that they can use that, which is extremely important, particularly in bad winters. Here, we don't tend to have real bad winters very often. You get into the northwest part of our state, we're in the snow belt, and you're getting a couple 100 inches of snow a year. That makes a huge difference for those deer, huge difference. So we want to provide this year round. Back up almost 30 years now, and I'll tell you where my story with fire started. I grew up on a dairy farm in north central PA. We burned the occasional pasture when I was a kid growing up, having no concept for fire breaks or understanding how this whole thing worked. It's just what farmers did. When I went to grad school at the University of New Hampshire, we learned about prescribed fire and hardwoods and got to do a little bit of it. But I mean, it was like this much. Kind of knew it existed, but didn't know much about it. Finished grad school, I ended up in Central Florida. What do they do in Florida? Burn, baby, burn. One of the first things we did is I got sent to fire school, became a certified burner, and then we burned, and we burned a lot. The 4 years I was there, I personally was involved in over 100,000 acres of burns. It was great. We did almost all of that from the air. It was all helicopter burn, or mostly helicopter burn and aerial ignition systems. It was awesome for a young guy just out of grad school. Our burn units had to be a minimum of 200 acres in size because of the helicopter. We had numerous crews going, so we burned anywhere from burn units 200 up to 2,000 acre burn units, and we burned multiple ones every day. It was great, and it worked. We provided tremendous habitat. Now, I share that with you to say, hey, what I do now, and certainly what I do in my personal place in Pennsylvania, I still like fire. I still use fire, but I think of it entirely different from a scale perspective. I no longer think of it in burn units of 200 acres or more. I'm thinking it in very small units. Not to say that bigger burn units don't work and don't have advantages, but for the average person managing deer, certainly the average private landowner managing deer, oftentimes we talk about these big burn units. If you can't burn 100 acres or 200 acres, then it's not valuable. Well, that's not true at all. You know, there's times that you have extremely valuable burn units that may be a half an acre or 2 acres or 5 acres. I'm not saying the Game Commission or DCNR or Nature Conservancy is going to be all excited to go out to burn smaller units, but they certainly understand the values of those as well. So from a private landowner standpoint, there is huge potential for use at those smaller scales and benefits to deer. So with that, let's talk about forest management first, right? We have those 3 components: forests, old fields, and food plots. We'll start with forests. Forest management is important because this provides great food and cover. We've all seen examples of poor forest management where it provides neither, but if we do a good job, we can provide a lot of food and the necessary cover. And what we want is a diversity of stand types. We want this interspersed across an area because that you can see here easily places for fawns to hide, for adults to hide. And with this, how many people in here are deer hunters? Bunch of deer hunters in here. Could you picture jumping a deer out of this block? If you walked in here, would you be surprised if a deer jumped up? Others who are not hunters, deer enthusiasts, if you're looking to take a picture of a deer, could you see this as a good place to go and take a picture of a deer? Fine. Absolutely. Whether it's in the morning, midday, afternoon, this is a great place because you can see there's a bunch of food and it's providing good cover. We don't want this. This might be a great place to go have a picnic, but it's certainly not a very good place for a deer. If we start talking about a food end, we're only looking at 50 to 100 pounds of food per acre here. Now, remember, we said each deer needs about 2,000 pounds. So you need a lot of this to feed just one deer. And you would need a lot of this even just to hide one deer. So we don't want this. This is far better. Whoops. Uh-oh, what'd I do? Thank you for the help. We don't want that. This is much better. From a food in now, in a stand like this, we're looking somewhere around 1,000 pounds of food per acre, which is way more. Now we're starting to get something. We have a lot better cover here. You can see some soft mast in here. Can certainly picture kicking deer out of this. How about birds? You could, any birders in here? Could you see birds wanting to come in and feed on these berries, nest here in this mid-story? Yeah, we're starting to do a lot better job from a wildlife management end. And now if we add fire into this mix, we can get even more. This particular stand has a measured 1,400 pounds of food per acre. So by adding some forest management techniques, we can improve, and fire really allows us to take this to another level. And with this, I'm not just talking about pines or fires and pines. I've burned a bunch of pines, and that's often what we think of historically is if you're going to do this in the woods, sure, that's fine for pines. Well, fortunately here, even in Pennsylvania, we are much more exposed today to burning in hardwoods and the value of hardwood burns. Luke did a great job sharing some data there. Dr. Craig Harper from the University of Tennessee has spoke at this in the past and shared. Dr. Marcus Lashley has been here and talked. So suddenly we're seeing this, and we're seeing more of this in Pennsylvania, which is great. So I'm going to share one data slide with you. This is some work that Dr. Craig Harper and Marcus Lashley had done. This is actually when Marcus was in grad school. So look at all over on the left. This was the amount, and basically we're talking about of deer food produced. And with this on a pounds per acre basis. Control, so if we're not really doing much at all, you can see, well, there's not a whole lot of food. If we go in and burn, we don't improve it a whole lot, do we? And I should use this specifically because some people think, oh, well, if we introduce fire in here, then we automatically are going to get a lot more food. And just fire alone in many cases isn't it. So it certainly is a little bump. However, if we add that with some forest management, we can get a much larger bump. Take a look, fire, yep, we get some. If we just go in and conduct a shelter wood cut, yeah, there's some more forage there as well. But boy, if we combine those two, look how big of a jump we can get with that. So think about all of the cutting that goes on here in the state. There is tremendous opportunity to introduce fire into those areas to greatly elevate the amount of food that we have with this. So the shelter wood and fire, huge jump, then improvement cut and fire. Now that starts looking at the shelter wood is a little more from a silvicultural standpoint. The improvement cut is thinking more in terms of deer, less interested or less goal driven by just the timber value. But what if we actually just have deer as the primary goal of this? So what the difference there is that starting to select some other deer specific species, things that would be really good for deer, and or association of where some of those trees were cut. So some of the patches and how they were. So essentially what they found through that study was take a look at this. Luke mentioned this herbaceous understory in some cases, the amount of opening that you need in the canopy to get it. So what we have here is certainly a hardwood canopy, but more of an herbaceous understory, which is awesome food for deer, turkeys, songbirds, and a whole bunch of other species. So in all of the oak that were in this, essentially we end up with mature oaks raining acorns down into an herbaceous understory. So it's like food on top of food, which is really good. And from that graph that I just showed you, if you like pictures better, essentially what this is they found was they got over a 600% increase in deer forage. Pretty darn good. So, I mean, it's available to anybody to be able to do. This has actually been, this was done in East Tennessee areas. I have been on this place, very similar to much of our hardwood forest that you see here. And in fact, if you jumped out of here today and we dropped you off in this area, you'd have a hard time not knowing that you were or were not in one of our Pennsylvania woods. So something that's directly applicable to what we have here. So how can we do this? You think, you know what, if you have not burned in hardwoods, or particularly if you're talking to a landowner with this, you know, they often have a misconception of exactly what this would look like. They may have seen fire in fields. They may have seen some Phragmites swamps burned or warm season grasses burned, these huge flame lengths, these intense fires, or maybe even fires in some pines where we see some pretty tall stuff. But in reality, in many cases from hardwood, you know, this is what we're talking about. Very low flame lengths, very, you know, unintense fires, The folks coming out that want to get the awesome videos and awesome pictures often get here for the first time and be like, oh, this is it. Like, this is like, I was expecting something way more intense and exciting. But this is what we're talking about. We're removing that leaf litter, burning that up, going through here and seeing tremendous gains in deer forage. So Luke made a comment about going through, and removing logs or stumps from the edge of trees. Certainly on something on a smaller scale, it's not bad at all to be able to go through here. And if there is a tree laying against the trunk, to just kick it away. And I agree, I'm not going to do that if I'm burning a 100-acre block. But if I am burning smaller acre blocks, I'm often in there inspecting what is going on to make sure everything is going to be good anyway. So, and then after you burn these 1 or 2 times, to be able to go through, sure, if a limb falls or something against a tree at the base, you can move it. But in most cases, it's a very quick endeavor to go through these units to make sure, I'm going to be able to do this safely, achieve my goals, and not reduce the value of any of my overstory trees. Often when these are done just with the backpack leaf blower, we're not even talking about a fire plow or a disc or needing a crick or anything else for fire breaks. Literally is going through, moving the leaf litter away so we have dirt on the ground and then being able to burn. So, and it's a pretty easy entry level for folks into burning woods if they have never done it. If we want to talk about a really small scale with this is a great exhibit by Dr. Marcus Lashley. Said, what would it take to convince somebody to actually burn for the first time in a hardwood system? So Marcus is a big bow hunter. Do we have any bow hunters here? I know we have a few. I'll have my hand raised with this as well. 30-yard bow shot is very commonly taken during archery season. So he said, what if we took a tree where a tree stand would be and literally drew a 30-yard radius around it? So anything within this radius would be within bow range. They then went in with a leaf pack blower, blew a fire break around it, and they burned a 30-yard radius around some of these trees. So what type of acreage are we talking here? Anybody do the math real quick? See, is that pi r squared or was that 2 pi? A 30-yard radius around a tree, we're looking about 0.2 acres. Has anybody ever planted a 1/4 acre food plot or 1/2 acre food plot? Heck yeah. So if you spend all the time and energy to plant a 1/4 acre food plot, why not do something like this? I will promise you it costs way less and you can do way more of this for a 1/4 acre spread around a property and have tremendous impacts for deer. So great entry level into burning here. All right, let's shift gears in and go to the early successional vegetation. With this, these are tremendous for providing food and cover. This stand is containing somewhere between 2,000 and 4,000 pounds of food per acre, way more than we're getting even in the woods. This is ideal fawning cover. And from the forbs, this is what we're talking about. We want to remove grasses and replace them with forbs. This is where the value is. Warm season grasses can certainly be used in these, and they are a lot, and they provide a lot of cover, but you know what? They provide no food. So from my standpoint, I don't want to see fields full of these if I have no food in it, because I can get just as good a cover from forbs and broadleaf plants as I can the grass, but then I also get all that benefit of food. Now, I'm not entirely opposed to grass. I just never want to see more than about 1/3 of a field of grass. Grass is good because it helps carry fire through there. But from a wildlife standpoint, the forbs are where the food value is. So that's what we're managing for from a deer perspective in these. In these old fields, fire is extremely beneficial. It is arguably the best way and the cheapest way to manage these. You can burn entire fields. This is particularly valuable if these start to succeed back into woods and get all the woody stems. Late growing season fires are a great way to reduce the woody competition. So we can burn whole fields with this. We can burn just strips with this. And from a deer hunter standpoint, these have become magnets during deer season to burn strips of these fields, because you end up with, then you get more annual plants in those strips. Annuals essentially are higher in higher in nutritional quality, so food value, than perennials. But you want perennials as well because they are taller and they're more valuable from a cover. So these old fields, we should be managing for annuals and perennials. And a great way to do it is to be able to burn these in strips. We also can burn spots. For years with these old fields, we used to be able to go in once a year on a UTV or an open cab tractor and just spray stuff we didn't want, like autumn olive, honeysuckle, big patches of grass or something. And then we would just leave that and just wait to see what greened up underneath. We said, you know what, rather than leaving it, let's go in after we spray it about 3 weeks later and burn it. Because once we burn it, then we just accelerate how quickly we get something good below it. We can then leave it like that to green up, or you can walk through and just broadcast some small seeds into that. And from a deer hunter standpoint, this is magic. Certainly deer appreciate it, but we can use it from a hunting end as well. And once this is done, green up in about 2 rains, whether you leave that to green up by itself or you're spreading something on it. So it's a very short period of time that anything is brown or black, as you are all well aware, but a very easy way to increase what we have from a deer standpoint. They provide great hunting end from these. And this is true whether we're talking in the spring, the fall. They are exceptional from spring turkey season all the way through our archery season and even into our firearm season. So we're doing right by deer with what we're providing. And at the same time, we can use that to our advantage from a deer hunting end as well. The last thing then are food plots. And I will say this, we can provide a lot of food with these. If we do a good job, lots and lots of food, but they're expensive, right? They can be very expensive. Average price today is between $350 and $450 an acre for lime, fertilizer, seed, etc. Everything that you need to go in. That can be expensive. I'm a food plot fan. I plant a lot, but I don't plant as many as I used to. I have shifted a lot of those acres into those early successional vegetation. But I like food plots. So from that end, these can provide food. Some can also provide cover, but we want to make sure as a deer manager that we are using these to just supplement that other work we're doing. We want to do good work in the forest, in our old fields. That's what we carry the deer herd with. And then we just use these food plots to supplement that. So what are we going to plant? Lots of things that we can plant for deer and lots of things that deer love to eat. But the single best thing that we can plant for deer from a manager's perspective is lead. That is by far number one, because it doesn't matter how much food we try to produce. Deer herds can grow above the amount that we have. So we want to do habitat work, but at the same time, we need to manage this from the deer end and be shooting the appropriate number of antlerless deer so that it's not above the amount of food that we're producing. But let's quickly break this into 3 groups as well. All the stuff in food plots, we really think of it as 3 different groups. Cool season perennials, things like clover and alfalfa, very commonly planted for deer. Warm season annuals, these are things we think of like from a farmer's perspective, corn, soybeans, etc. And then cool season annuals. These are our brassicas, our cereal grains. None of these provide food all year for deer, but we can pick from each of these 3 categories and plant. And from that, even here in Pennsylvania, provide food year round, which is pretty cool. And we can use fire to help us with all 3 of these. This is my daughter in late winter, burning an area that we are going to then go ahead and plant clover in. We burn this off. It's very safe. We then just broadcast clover into it. And at this time of the year, it's basically like frost seeding, freeze thaw the ground, sets the seed, or we could drive over it with a cultipacker or a UTV, or just let rain beat the seed in and get tremendous germination. We don't need big equipment. It's very simple. It's very easy. We do the same thing later in the spring. We burn some of these off to prepare for a warm season planting of corn or soybeans. We can't broadcast these because these are larger seeds that need to be planted, but we can drill these in. We're not tilling anything. We're not disking anything. So we continue to get the benefits of no-till technology. We continue to build organic matter, which is great. And we do the same thing late summer. We burn some more off and then broadcast brassicas into these. Simple, literally broadcast. I mean, you see, I got the over-the-shoulder cedar. Walk through here, do that. We're lucky to have a cultipacker. We can drive that. If not, you can just do this before a rain. Let the rain beat the seed in. You can drive your UTV or AT over it to get good seed to soil contact. None of this is difficult. None of this requires big equipment. It's available to everybody, and it has tremendous benefits for deer and other wildlife. So we do that, and from a food plot end, you plant, and then what do? You pray for rain, right? You could do everything right, but if it doesn't rain, you don't get the benefits from it. And that's why I can't overemphasize enough that use the forest management and the old field management to carry the deer herd. That's where you need to provide the food. Then just use this to supplement, and the deer will be far happier. Certainly you as a deer manager will be far happier. So to end then with, if we do a good job providing proper habitat management, then we can get year-round cover from a diversity of softwood species, hardwood species, old fields. But we also then can use this to get year-round food from an agricultural end, hard and soft mast. Luke did a great job mentioning vines. There's all kinds of vines and shrubs that all people just often overlook that are incredibly valuable for deer and other wildlife. So by combining what we talked about here today, we can get all of this. Fire can help advance every one of these and make it easier for us and elevate the actual pounds of nutrition that we can get. And then from that, we also get fantastic hunting. And you know what? The carrot at the end of the stick for that for hunters is often a big deer or maybe multiple deer. But the thing that I enjoy about it the most is that good deer habitat management is so beneficial for all those other wildlife species, you know, that make our woods and our forests and our fields so special here in Pennsylvania and beyond. So with that, this is my email address. I'm going to be here the whole time afterwards. So feel free to come ask me anything afterwards, though, if I can help. By all means, email me at this. And with that, before